The Light Beneath the Waves, a Bellewood sleep story. The fire is lit, the village is sleeping, let us begin. There is a sound the sea makes near Bellewood that few talk about openly. It's not the gulls, or the hush of waves, or even the rhythmic creak of boats tugging at rope. It is something older, lower, a bell beneath the surface. Fishermen claim they've heard it just before the fog rolls in thick. Teenagers dare each other to row to the cove and listen, but those who have lived longest in Bellewood know better. They say the bell only rings when the sea takes someone. Alden Shaw has kept the lighthouse above that cove for 31 years, and he doesn't believe in bells beneath the waves. Every evening, Alden lights the lamp by hand. He moves with the precision of a man who long ago gave his heart to routine. He oils the gears, trims the wick, cleans the glass. When the flame catches, he steps back and nods once, silent, reverent. Then he sits at the little desk tucked in the corner of the watchroom and writes the weather in the logbook. Cloud ceiling, wind speed, visibility. Notes on fishing boats seem off the western point. Nothing personal, nothing unnecessary, except for the fog journal. The fog journal is not required. It is a worn leather notebook he keeps hidden behind the cupboard of lantern oil. Every night it fogs. He opens it and he writes to her, to Miriam. She died 17 years ago in early spring when the crocuses bloomed against the frost. She was a painter. She loved the sea. She used to say fog was God's way of telling stories sideways. Alden never understood what she meant, but he writes her anyway. Just a few lines, every fog. Saw the red sails again today. I think they fish deeper now. The storm washed up a scallop shell. I left it on your windowsill. The fog was thin, like you barely left. He brews tea. He eats supper. He checks the lamp again at midnight. He does not expect more from this life. But life, as it happens, is not done with Alden Shaw. Not yet. On a Thursday, in late October, the fog rolled in before sunset. Alden noticed it from the vegetable plot where he was pulling the last of the leeks. The air thickened, the wind dropped, the horizon vanished. He stood, hands dirty, knees stiff, and looked toward the sea. There was a pressure to the fog tonight, like something sitting just behind the veil. He washed up, lit the lamp, and noted the weather. Then, as was his way, he pulled the fog journal from behind the oil tins. But this time, when he opened it, there was already something written there. Not in his hand, not in ink he owned, just a single line in the corner of the page. I hear it too. He stared. He blinked. He flipped the page forward, back, checked the spine, the edge, the desk beneath. No signs of smudges, no signs of anyone, just the lamp burning steady and the sea speaking low outside. He closed the journal, and for the first time in 17 years, he did not write. He just watched and listened. At 3:30 in the morning, Alden heard footsteps. They came slow and steady, crunching over the gravel path that wound from the base of the lighthouse to the sea road. He rose from his cot, pulse heavy in his ears, and pulled on his coat. The air was thick enough to swallow the lamp's beam whole. He opened the door, peered out, nothing, just fog and the thump of the tide. But then, a shape, a woman standing by the gate. She was cloaked in something long and pale, almost the same color as the fog itself. Her hair was pulled back, salt gray, and her hand rested on the post like she belonged there. She said nothing. Alden's voice was rough from disuse. "Can I help you?" She tilted her head, not startled, not afraid, just curious. "You're the one who writes," she said. Alden blinked. "Pardon?" "The journal," she said softly. "You write to the woman in the fog." He stepped forward, instinct pulling him toward her, but she took a single step back. "I hear it too," she said, but she doesn't speak with words. "Who are you?" She didn't answer, only looked past him toward the lighthouse. And then, almost shyly, she reached into her pocket and handed him something, a scallop shell. Carved into its inside curve was a single letter, M. When Alden looked up, she was gone. Alden did not sleep. He sat in the lantern room, eyes fixed on the fog as it curled around the glass, as though it were trying to get in. He held the shell. It was real, heavy, still cool from the woman's hand. He had seen it, felt it. But who had she been? The next morning, the fog was gone. Sunlight laced the windows, weak and white, but enough to prove it hadn't been a dream. He flipped through the fog journal. The writing was still there. I hear it, too. He added no reply. Instead, he opened Miriam's paint box. He had kept it tucked away on a shelf under a linen cloth. The hinges were stiff with salt. Inside, the brushes lay exactly as she had left them, some still tinted at the tips with blues and ochres. Tucked in the bottom was an unfinished watercolor of the cove, and faintly, in the mist above the water, barely visible, a bell. He sat back. Miriam had painted it long before she died, long before anyone had ever spoken of the bell. 2 days later, the storms came. Not the kind that shout, but the kind that whisper long before they arrive. The air grew heavy, the waves restless, and in the old pantry beside the root cellar, Alden found a relic he hadn't seen in years. A widow's weather glass. It had been Miriam's, a narrow bottle of blown glass, sealed with wax and brine that shifted colors as the weather changed. She used to keep it by the window, and it called it her oracle. He held it now in the lamplight. The water inside was swirling with little threads of white. He didn't remember what that meant, but something in his bones did. Something in the house felt alert. He lit a second lamp, checked the radio, though he had never used it. Boats were coming in fast from the northeast. He saw them, dark silhouettes against the lowering sky. He watched them disappear behind the sea rocks, one by one. Then the bell rang. Not the one above the water, the one beneath. Low, muffled, a tone that didn't carry through air, but through ribs. And then he knew someone was about to be taken or returned. By dawn the next day, the sea was almost still. The storm had passed without incident, or so it seemed. But Alden knew better. He'd sat by the lantern all night, the widow's weather glass glowing with clouded threads, the bell's low hum still resting in his sternum like a held breath. And as the mist parted over the water, he saw it, a red sail. It cut a quiet figure against the silver gray of the sea, too old, too weather-worn to belong to any of the local boats, but unmistakable. He'd seen it before. The red sail had belonged to Thomas Fielding, the last man Miriam painted before she died. A quiet fisherman, widowless, vanished 3 winters ago in a squall that left no wreckage, only speculation. No one expected him back. But there he was, at least a boat that looked like his, drifting toward the harbor with no oars. Alden grabbed his coat and made his way down the narrow cliff trail, boots slipping on the wet shawl. He reached the cove just as the boat touched shore. It was empty. Not a soul aboard, just a folded wool coat, still damp, and a pewter flask tucked into its pocket. The same flask Thomas used to pass around after services. Alden crouched. Tied to the tiller with twine was a small bundle, oilcloth wrapped tight, the edges carefully sealed with wax. He opened it. Inside, one paintbrush, 3 pressed sea pansies, and a scrap of linen that smelled faintly of Miriam's rose soap. He did not speak. He only carried the bundle back to the lighthouse, placed it in Miriam's old drawer, and made tea. Not everything could be explained, but some things he had decided didn't need to be. The sea returned what it wished and took what it must. Two days passed with no more strange boats. Alden kept the lamp trimmed and wrote his usual notations in the weather log: barometric pressure, humidity, wind direction. He didn't open the fog journal, not until the mist returned. He sat down, reached behind the oil tins, and pulled it out. But this time, there was more. Under the line that appeared before, "I hear it too," were 5 new words. "It's not coming from below." He stared at the page. The handwriting was the same, elegant, deliberate, ink slightly faded, as if aged by salt air. It unnerved him, not because it was unexplainable, but because it felt kind, considered. Alden dipped his pen. "Then where is it coming from?" he wrote. He waited. Of course, nothing happened. Still, he left the journal open on the desk. That night, a windstorm came up from the southeast. He climbed to the lantern room, expecting it to be rattling, shaking, but the wind was low, not fierce, just constant, like it was pushing something across the sea. And then he heard it. The bell. But not below. Behind him. He turned. There was nothing in the room but the light and its long spinning shadow. But when he stepped back into the keeper's quarters, the fog journal had changed. A sketch. Charcoal lines, delicately drawn, of the lighthouse. His lighthouse, but in ruin, ivy covered, stone fractured, and beneath it one word: soon. The next morning, Alden stood in the equipment shed staring at an old length of bell rope. It had once connected the tower's warning bell to a lever below, allowing it to ring manually during storms. It hadn't been used in years, but last night the sound was too crisp, too close, too deliberate. He checked the lever, dusty, untouched. Still, he climbed the tower. Inside the lantern room, Nothing was out of place until he looked at the bell rope. It had been retied. A mariner's knot, elegant, intentional. Miriam had been the one to show him that knot when they were young. She'd learned it from a cousin who sailed in Maine, said it was more beautiful than functional. They used to tie it in gift ribbons, but it had no business here. He loosened the window, looked down. On the narrow ledge below the glass, resting atop the stonework, sat a small seashell, delicate, pale pink, a scallop. Inside it, another note, folded carefully, tucked in dry. He opened it, written in that same familiar hand. It ends with the tide. He didn't understand, but the tide was turning. He could feel it. That evening, Alden did something he hadn't done since Miriam died. He lit the memory lantern. It was a tradition he had once dismissed, something Miriam picked up from older women in town who claimed it helped guide thoughts to their rightful places. The lantern wasn't for light, it was for memory. Inside it was a single beeswax taper, one that had been dipped in the same batch they used for their wedding candles. He placed it on the table near the fog journal. Then, with a deliberate calm, he opened the book again. There was a new sketch, a tree, barren, windswept, perched on a cliff. Beneath it, a gray marker. No name, no date, just the shape of the tree. He knew it. It stood near the path where the children used to sled in winter, just above the cove. He had not walked that path in years, but the tree, he remembered carving something into it with Miriam the year they were engaged. 2 letters, an A and an M. He left the lantern burning and made his way outside. The wind had shifted, cooler now, the tide nearly full. As he approached the tree, something caught his eye. A small bundle, wrapped in netting, hung carefully on one of the branches. Inside it, a pocket compass, a pressed whelk shell, and another folded note. Not lost, just returned differently. Alden sat at the base of the tree. He didn't weep. He only listened to the wind, to the sea, to the sound of a memory finally anchoring itself. He would not go back to the lighthouse that night. He would stay by the tree until the sun came. Let the flame in the lantern carry the rest. The sun rose slowly, casting rose gold over the sea. Alden remained at the base of the tree, the compass warm in his palm. He had dreamed, but it wasn't one of those wild, incoherent dreams the sea sometimes offered. It was precise. In the dream, Miriam stood beside him, older than he remembered her, but whole. Her hand rested on the fog journal, and she whispered something he couldn't quite hear. When he woke, the whelk shell was gone. He didn't panic. He simply nodded to himself and stood. The path home felt different, each footfall deliberate, as though walking not away from the past, but toward something. When he reached the lighthouse door, a package waited on the step. Wrapped in wax linen, the parcel held a book, one he hadn't seen in decades. Miriam's private sketchbook. He'd believed it buried with her, at her request. But here it was. He opened it with care. The pages were different than he remembered. Not just drawings, but messages, symbols, a language not entirely of words. One page stood out, a circle of water with a tiny light at the center, a single line below it. When the bell is silent, the door will open. That evening, Alden did something unusual. He left the lighthouse, took nothing but his coat, the journal, and Miriam's book. He walked down the bluff road, past the village, past the crabapple grove, past the turn where the sea road began. He was headed to a place no one spoke of anymore, the old light, not the standing tower, the one before it, ruined, half swallowed by moss and sand, but once it had shone. The door was gone, but the arch remained, and in the center of that space, something pulsed faintly, a shimmer, a sound, the bell, but not ringing, breathing, a light, low and humming, like a voice preparing to speak. Alden opened the journal. The pages turned on their own, stopped on a single sketch, a key. He knelt, traced the drawing with his finger. The stone below shifted. A narrow compartment opened. Inside, a real key, iron, cold, and under it, a folded map marked with a single phrase. The light beneath the waves is not gone, only waiting. Alden took the key, and for the first time in years, he smiled. Not because he understood, but because he no longer needed to. Alden had not expected it to. He had thought, perhaps, even hoped, it would be one more riddle and a long line of unanswered ones. But it slid into the lock beneath the ruined arch of the old lighthouse floor, as though it had been waiting all this time. And when he turned it, something inside the stone stirred. A panel dropped open, revealing a stairwell descending into the ground. It smelled of brine and old metal and something else. Jasmine. Miriam's scent. He followed the winding stairs, lantern in hand. The walls were lined in old copper, muddled green. Carvings etched in a hand, not quite human, marked the turns. Symbols, circles, stars that blinked back when the light passed over them. At the bottom was a chamber, round, sealed, silent. At its center stood a basin filled with water, still as glass. Above it, suspended from the ceiling by chains of woven kelp and iron, hung a lantern unlike any he had seen. He stepped forward. The journal in his coat began to warm. Its pages fluttered. He went still. One page glowed. A drawing of the same basin, and words written in Miriam's hand. Light only returns where salt meets flame. He knelt beside the basin, reached into his coat pocket, found the smallest thing he had carried without reason, a pinch of sea salt, wrapped in a corner of Miriam's old handkerchief. He scattered it across the water. Then he lit the taper from the memory lantern and touched it to the basin's edge. The water glowed. In it, a face appeared. Miriam's, but younger. Not the woman he buried. The girl he first met at the market, sketching gulls in the margins of a book. She looked at him, smiled, did not speak, but the bell above the chamber let out a soft toll. And the chamber lit, not with sunlight, but with memory. Drawings on the wall illuminated themselves, scenes from their life, their wedding day, the first storm in the lighthouse, a tiny sketch of their daughter who had only lived a few days. Miriam's hand was in everything. The basin went still. The light above faded, and Alden whispered, "I remember." It was not sorrow. It was release. He climbed the stairs with the weight of silence on his shoulders, not heavy, but holy. When he reached the archway again, the wind had changed. It was warm, carrying jasmine and something else, the promise of sleep. Back in the lighthouse, Alden unrolled the parchment map he'd found beneath the bell. It wasn't a normal map. There were no towns, no topography, only a series of spirals drawn like currents swirling into one another. In the bottom corner, a signature, not Miriam's name, but her childhood mark, a crescent moon stitched through with a needle. She had made this. At the center of the spirals, a single word was written, here. Not home, not Bellewood, just here. The journal warmed again, its pages turned to one freshly inked without Alden's hand. A storm is not always the end. He didn't know what that meant yet, but the wind was rising, and with it, a feeling. The next day, the villagers noticed a change in Alden. He walked through town with purpose again, not hurried, but sure. He spoke with the candlemaker about oil. He bought a new ink from the apothecary, and from the old carpenter he requested a lantern case, sturdy enough to carry into fog. He was preparing, but for what? That night, he returned to the old chamber. This time, he didn't descend. He stood beneath the ruined arch, journal in hand, and whispered, "I'll find the others." Because that's what the map had shown. Not one light beneath the waves, but many, waiting, like memory, or sleep, or forgiveness. And as Alden stood in the hush of the night, the lantern in his chest no longer felt like something lost. It felt like something lit. The village of Bellewood had once been part of a larger network, so Alden had been told. Long ago, mariners lit lamps up and down the coast, each according to a secret rhythm, a code in light, a way of saying, "We are still here." It was called the Lamplighter's Code. Miriam had believed in it. She believed the rhythm told stories, that if you knew how to read them, you'd never truly be lost at sea. Alden never took it seriously, until now. The map was not just a guide, it was a score. Each spiral, a verse. Each crescent notch, a beat. He remembered Miriam tapping her fingers along the window pane during storms. He thought she was nervous. She wasn't. She was counting. That night, He climbed to the top of the lighthouse with 6 lanterns. He hung them on long brass arms from the outer rail. Then, with the journal in one hand and the map in the other, he began to light them in rhythm. 3 quick, 1 long, 2 short. Pause. Repeat. From the harbor below, an old fisherman raised his eyes. "A message," he muttered. "Haven't seen one of all those in 30 years. By midnight, the whole village stood on the bluff, not speaking, just watching. Because far off, beyond the headland, another light answered. Just one, but enough. Alden smiled. Not everything was lost. Some things were just waiting for the right light. In the early morning hours, after the light had stopped flashing and the crowd had gone home, Alden returned to the ruined chamber beneath the lighthouse. There, cradled inside the mouth of the great iron bell, he found an envelope. It was yellowed, sealed with wax, and bore no address. Only one word, written in delicate script. Alden. He opened it slowly. Inside, a letter in Miriam's handwriting, faded but unmistakable. My dearest, if you are reading this, then somehow the sea has returned you to me. I never truly left. I've only been waiting for you to see what I could not explain. That love, like the tide, goes out, but it always returns in some form. There are more lights, Alden, more places where the rhythm still waits. This is not the end. It's a beginning. Follow the currents, trust the spirals, and never stop lighting the way for others. I'll be in the next one. M. Alden folded the letter and placed it into the fog journal. Then he climbed the spiral steps to the lantern room once more. The glass was fogged, but he didn't wipe it clean. He wanted the light to scatter, to spread. He lit the lamp. 3 quick, 1 long, 2 short. The rhythm of memory, of love, of return. Each morning now, Alden walked the narrow edge of the cliff behind the lighthouse, not to light a signal, but to search the sea, just to walk. It was Miriam's old path, the one she'd called the Keeper's Walk, a winding trail from the garden gate to a little cairn of stacked stones overlooking the sea. No one else in the village ever walked it. Too uneven, too remote, too exposed to the wind. But Alden walked it every morning. He had begun leaving small offerings at the cairn, not in the religious sense, in the remembering sense. A smooth stone with a swirl of quartz like a wave. A broken piece of driftwood shaped like a curled sleeping fox. A sprig of dried thyme tied with thread from Miriam's own spool. Each object a memory, each memory a light, and each morning, as he placed one more piece upon the growing pile, he whispered the same words, "I'm still here." The villagers started to notice, not just the lights, but Alden himself. They saw how he moved differently, spoke gently, listened deeply. Children followed him to the edge of the bluff some evenings. He'd let them help polish the lantern glass. Elders brought him bread and asked if he would read them old letters aloud by the sea. He was no longer the man who had lost. He was the man who remembered, and in remembering, he had returned. The lighthouse glowed each night now, even on calm seas, because someone might still be watching, and someone always is. It appeared one morning, tied loosely in the dock at the harbor's end, a small fishing boat, old, salt-scuffed, and utterly unfamiliar. No name etched into the stern, no gear aboard, just a woolen blanket folded neatly over the bench and a sprig of rosemary pinned to the bow. No one in the village claimed it. No fishermen recognized it. No tides were expected to bring anything in that week, and yet there it was. Alden came down the bluff trail and stood beside it for a long time. He placed one hand on the edge of the boat. It was warm, sunlit, but somehow more than that, like the warmth that had been waiting for someone to receive it. Inside, there was a folded piece of paper under the blanket. You found me once. Now it is my turn. There was no signature, but Alden knew the handwriting. He didn't untie the boat. He simply sat in it for a while, looking toward the horizon, as if waiting for something only the sea could answer. The lighthouse behind him stayed lit all morning, not for safety, but for welcome, just in case another traveler might be on their way. That night, Alden returned to the lighthouse with the folded note still in his pocket. He took down the leather-bound journal Miriam had left for him, the one he hadn't dared write in since the storm passed. It felt too final, too sacred, like finishing it would end something he wasn't ready to lose. But now the boat had stirred something, a shift, a calling. He opened to the first blank page and began. The sea gave something back today, not a soul, not a sign, just presence, and that was enough. The rosemary had not wilted. The blanket smelled faintly of home. I sat in that boat until the sun leaned too low to ignore. I did not dream last night, but I remembered. Is that a kind of dreaming too? Each night that followed, Alden wrote, not because he was trying to document, but because it anchored him. Sometimes the entries were long, other nights, just a line. Fog thick tonight, bell quieter than usual, listening anyway. Or, I miss the sound of her brush on paper. One evening, a new entry appeared, written in handwriting not quite his own. Lightkeepers do not wait. They remember. They send light ahead. That is the task. He paused. He blinked, but the words did not vanish. He placed the journal on the windowsill by the lantern, and for the first time in years, he slept until dawn without waking. The days shortened, the wind sharpened, and Alden kept the night watch, not because it was needed. The harbor was quiet, no storms, no vessels overdue, but because something had shifted since the arrival of the boat, a presence, a noticing. He lit the lamp earlier each evening now, trimmed the wick with extra care, cleaned the lens until it gleamed like memory. Sometimes he spoke aloud to no one. Other nights, he sat in silence with a mug of tea, watching the beam of light cut across the waves. Each rotation felt like a promise. I am here. I am watching. You are not alone. One night, the beam caught a figure down at the bluff, not moving, just standing in the wind, too far to make out details. No lantern, no dog, just stillness. Alden leaned forward. Then the clouds passed, and moonlight poured across the land. The bluff was empty. But in the journal that night, a new line appeared. You kept the light, so I could follow it. He exhaled, closed the book, and left the lamp burning an hour longer than usual, just in case someone else was watching. The next day brought wind from the east and something else with it, a sealed glass bottle caught in the seaweed just below the stair that led to the dock. Alden found it at sunrise. The bottle was narrow, green-tinted, with a wax-sealed cork and a note inside, tightly rolled and tied with faded blue twine. He held it up to the light. Inside, the note read, "To the one who keeps the fire, thank you. We saw the light from 3 nights out and knew land was near. We have no names you'd recognize, but we remember your coast." There was no signature, no date, just those words. Alden placed it beside the journal, heart thudding, not with fear, but recognition. His light had reached someone. His keeping mattered. That night, he kept the lamp burning past midnight, and in the early hours, another note appeared. Not in a bottle this time, but tucked into the iron latch of the boathouse. This one was handwritten in careful script. I walked to the road you cleared, though it was grown with moss. I followed the light you kept, though I doubted my own compass. And now I've found the cliff again. Thank you for never letting it fall dark. Alden didn't speak aloud this time. He just pressed the note to his heart. And for the first time since the storm that took Miriam, he laughed, softly, briefly, but real. The tide had returned letters, and Alden had become more than a keeper. He was a witness. He was a quiet light in a world that needed one. He took a clean page in the journal and wrote, Entry 47, the light is reaching. Even now, when the sea is still, even now, when no sails are on the horizon, someone is watching, someone is remembering. I will keep the flame. There came a day, rare and windless, when Alden decided he would not climb the tower. Not because he was weary, but because the lamp did not need tending, not today. Instead, he packed a tin lunch, wrapped it in waxcloth, and walked down the path that led to the marsh garden Miriam once kept. There, among the cattails and the mint, he sat cross-legged on the low stone wall and pulled out his tea flask. He poured 2 cups and placed one beside him. To you, he said quietly, and to today. The day passed in slowness. Clouds hung like old lace across the sky. A heron passed overhead. A boy from the village waved to him from a skiff, and Alden waved back. He let the light go untended, not out of neglect, but because the world, just for a moment, felt lit on its own. That evening, he walked back to the tower. The steps creaked beneath his boots, and as he opened the door, he paused. There on the inside, scrawled in faint chalk, "It was beautiful today." He smiled. He had no idea who wrote it, but he felt sure it was true. And some part of him hoped, foolishly, wonderfully, that maybe it had been Miriam, just once, returning the favor. He left the chalk undisturbed and lit the lamp as dusk settled in, not because the world had gone dark again, but because it was his joy to keep it lit. It was just past the equinox when Alden noticed the flicker, a faint pulse of light in the northern dunes, low, rhythmic, as if someone were walking with a lantern and then pausing. He watched it for 3 nights, always the same time, always the same rhythm. On the 4th night, curiosity bested patience. He pulled on his coat and took the long path down to the sea line. The lantern flicker stayed steady. And when he crested the dune, he saw her. A girl. No, a young woman, walking barefoot, trailing the light behind her like a thought she hadn't spoken aloud. She did not startle when she saw him. "I thought you might come," she said. "The lighthouse sees everything." Her name was Nora. She was not from Bellewood, but her mother had been, and she came to the dunes each autumn to remember. Her mother had once loved the lighthouse keeper years before Alden had arrived. He was a quiet man too, she said. They walked without speaking for a long time. Then Alden asked gently, "Why the lantern?" Nora smiled. "Because she used to say that love, when lost, will always try to come back by light." They parted near the marsh, each heading home. The next night, Alden saw 2 lanterns on the dune, and neither of them was his. By late October, the morning mist began to burn off sooner. The days grew crisper, the sea brighter. Alden started finding envelopes slipped under the lighthouse door, each sealed with a dab of blue wax and stamped with the faint outline of a lighthouse bell. No names, no addresses, just notes, observations, memories, hopes. Today I forgave myself. I saw my father in the fog, just his coat. That was enough. I remembered the scent of salt and soap in her hair, and I finally wept. He read each one slowly, as though tasting them, and then carefully tucked them into the back of Miriam's sketchbook. He never saw anyone deliver them, but the lighthouse had begun to feel watched, not by ghosts, not by memory, by something gentler, curious, maybe grateful. He began to leave things out for them: a clean cup on the windowsill, a sprig of sea lavender, a blank page and a pen. They never took the offerings, but the letters kept coming. And in the margin of one, just once, someone had written, "You are not the only one keeping the light." One evening, Alden spotted something unusual. Out past the sandbar, just where the lighthouse beam faded into night, a glimmer danced on the water. It wasn't a lantern. It wasn't a boat. It was too low, too still. He stepped onto the lookout deck, adjusted the scope, and saw it. A single star reflected perfectly on the surface. But the sky above, it was empty. No star hung there. No light shone from above. Just the sea and that glowing speck, still and silent. He climbed down to the rocks and followed the path until it vanished in wet sand. The tide was high, the wind quiet, and still the light floated. As he approached, the water parted gently around it, as if it too remembered him. He knelt, and the star, closer now, became a pale glass orb, no larger than an egg, glowing from within. Inside it, a pressed violet, just one. He cupped it in his hands, warm, real, not magic exactly, just remembered beauty, returned. He carried it back to the lighthouse and placed it on the windowsill. And that night, the beacon didn't need to shine quite as brightly, because something else, something small and sure, was already doing the work. One rainy afternoon, Alden noticed an old cottage on the far cliff, blinking a soft golden light from behind its salt-blurred windows. It hadn't been lit for years. The widow Mallory had passed away some time back, and the cottage had sat empty. Locals said the shutters warped with grief, and the hearth never drew properly again. But there it was, light moving, then still. Alden braved the walk down, lantern in hand. The trail was slick, stones moss-covered, the mist pressing as thick as wool. The door was unlocked. Inside, dry. The air carried lavender and cedar, and seated in the widow's old chair, turned toward the window, was a figure. But it wasn't a ghost. It was Mei Lin, a school teacher who lived in Bellewood 2 winters ago and left without much word. Her coat was wet, her hands wrapped around a mug of tea. A second one sat on the table. "I wasn't expecting anyone," she said softly. Alden didn't ask how she'd come back. He just sat. They drank tea in silence, listening to the stove hum, to the way the sea stretched its long hush beneath them. "I saw the light," he finally said. She nodded. "I wasn't sure it would reach you." Outside, the rain slowed. A red fox crossed the path below. The two of them stayed until the light faded naturally with the sun. And when Alden walked back to the lighthouse, he found a pressed violet tucked inside the empty teacup he hadn't used. One morning, long after the fog had burned off the cliffs, Alden found a child's drawing folded into the base of the lighthouse's weather journal. It showed a crooked lighthouse drawn in charcoal with golden beams scribbled from its top. A small figure stood on the cliff's edge, arms lifted as if waving, or maybe reaching. No signature, just the drawing. He pinned it to the side of the window with sea glass tack and lit the lantern early that evening. Down below, a woman with her coat wrapped tightly and a boy holding her hand watched from the docks. They didn't wave, but they waited until the beam turned their way, and then they walked home. The next day, another drawing. This one showed a boat and a blue sail and a bird perched on its bow. It went on like that for weeks. Small drawings tucked into odd places beneath the kettle, folded into his coat pocket, slipped under the weather log. They were always made in crayon or charcoal, always simple, always hopeful. One day he saw the boy again, briefly. The woman was older, with a quiet sadness in her eyes. But the boy smiled and pointed at the tower. There he is. Alden waved this time. The light had become a language, not a warning, not even a welcome, just a reminder. Someone is out there, and someone is home. That evening, as the beam turned slowly over Bellewood's rooftops, Alden sat at his desk and began a new entry. To the one drawing lighthouses in the dark, I see you. I'll keep the lantern lit. The morning came when Alden knew it was time to write the last entry. It wasn't that he was tired, though he was, or lonely, though he had been. It was simply that the light no longer felt like it belonged to him. It was being held quietly by the village now, shared. He rose before the gulls stirred. The kettle hadn't yet begun to sing. He opened the weather journal, touched the frayed leather spine, and dipped the pen. For the next keeper, there is nothing to guard here but memory, nothing to measure but light, nothing to fear but forgetting. But should you ever feel lost in the night, strike a match, turn the lens, and remember, someone once stood here, too. He left his key wrapped in oilcloth by the bell pull, where only someone who understood the lighthouse would look. He packed very little, a sea journal, a broken lantern with one red pane, a drawing of a boat with a blue sail, and then he took the long walk down the cliff path. No one saw him go, but the light remained lit. That night, the beam swept Bellewood with perfect rhythm, as always. And if you were watching from the far shore or walking near the dunes, you might have seen it pause just once, a hiccup of light, like a farewell blink. Or maybe not. Maybe it was just your imagination. Sleep well, and remember, Bellewood is always here, waiting.